Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Post Up with David Grubb. I, of course, am David Grubb, and a very busy day for the New Orleans Pelicans as they are a day away from the NBA draft, and the Pelicans have already made another major move. Obviously, we want to start with discussing the CJ McCollum and Kelly Olynyk trade, and I think that it will certainly reshape the Pelicans draft strategy. Okay, let's start with the particulars of the deal. The Pelicans get Jordan Poole and Sadiq Bey and the number 40 overall pick, that second round pick from the Washington Wizards for the draft. And then what they are sending back is CJ McCollum and Kelly Olynyk, both of those players on expiring deals. When you look at what for the Pelicans in particular, what they're getting is now this is a team with 3 picks in this draft. A week ago they had 1 pick. Now they have 3 picks and are really in a position to kind of reshape this roster. And when you look at the players that they've added, you start with Jordan Poole as the headliner. First of all, his contract is not ridiculous. It's only 2 more years remaining on his deal. This is a guy who averaged 20 points per game last year. So you're getting someone who produced at a similar level to CJ McCollum, played in 68 games for the Wizards. 68, all 68 of those starts, has been a full-time starter for the last 2 seasons in Washington, and is a guy that for his career has shot 35% from three, but in particular these last few years, and last year he shot almost 38% from beyond three with some pretty good efficiency numbers. One of the things that really kind of excites me about Jordan Poole is when you look in the lineups, and the Wizards obviously were one of the worst teams in the league last year, the second worst team in the league behind the Jazz. And when you look at where they finished, well, the worst team in the league, excuse me, they were worse than the Jazz. But you look at the Wizards, the lineups with Jordan Poole, the 5-man lineups with Jordan Poole that got playing time, and there weren't a ton of lineups for Washington that got significant playing time. But you look at the 5-man lineups, they had 5 lineups that were net positives. And Jordan Poole is part of 3 of those. And when you look at those lineups, the kinds of players that he was able to be successful with, the lineup that he was most successful with was with Corey Kispert, Bilal Coulibaly, Alexander Sarr, and Keontae George. Those are guys who want to play with tempo. And certainly, I think that's what Joe Dumars wants to create for the New Orleans Pelicans. Zion Williamson is at his best when he's playing up tempo. Trey Murphy is at his best when he's playing up tempo. Certainly, Yves Missi running the court in transition is a lot more interesting to you than having him post up in the half court. So your team is better in transition, and Jordan Poole excels in transition. So I think that alone is a very exciting proposition. But you look at the other lineups that he excelled with. His second highest net rating lineup is a lineup that is a lot more similar to what the Pelicans were putting on the floor. You had Jonas Valanciunas in the center, Jordan Poole, Corey Kispert, another shooter again, not a great mobile guy, but a knockdown shooter in Kispert, and a guy who I think is underrated. Bilal Coulibaly, athletic on the perimeter, and Keontae George, a young guard at that. So these are teams that had good offensive ratings. Between them, a 117 for his lineup with Valanciunas and company, and a 115 offensive rating for that small ball lineup. And yes, in less than 100 minutes for both of those. But those were really effective lineups for the Washington Wizards. I mean, look at their defensive ratings, not so great, but that first group again put up about a 105 defensively in 53 minutes, only played 16 games together, but a high true shooting percentage for that group, 65%. Most of those guys are early in their careers. The Pelicans have more experience, and you're putting Jordan Poole alongside of Zion Williamson, who's going to draw plenty of attention for him and allow him to make shots. When you look at Sadiq Bey, yes, Bey missed last season due to injury, but when he was playing for Atlanta and Detroit for the last couple of seasons, when you look at the numbers that he was able to put up before missing last year with Washington, this was a guy who, through his career, had been a dependable scorer, averaging 14 points per game, shooting it at a 35% clip from deep, and a guy who gets to the free throw line and shoots them well. An 84% free throw shooter, gives you solid rebounding at the small forward position, 5 rebounds a game, can block a couple of shots, but not great, and also gives you some steals, and hasn't had to play a ton of minutes. A guy who's averaged about 30 minutes per game for his career. So you put him into your rotation not only is he a defender, he can defend, but this is a guy who has scored 50 points in a game in his career. He's had a 51-point game in the NBA. So if you have that kind of explosive potential on your bench, then I think that you've added a lot of firepower to this team. You're talking about 35 points being added to this roster on the perimeter. Now, you do open up a considerable hole on the interior, and I think that affects what the Pelicans' draft strategy will be, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But overall, I like this trade a lot for the New Orleans Pelicans. This is a very good trade. It's a very aggressive move by Joe Dumars to refit this team. And yeah, I see you comment, Brian. Yeah, Poole is absolutely a better fit in this moment than CJ McCollum. Not to disparage CJ. Before we move on, I just want to give CJ his due, because in his time in New Orleans, he did everything that was asked of him. CJ, 21 points per game over his 2+ seasons in New Orleans, shot the ball very well, obviously moved up the Pelicans' all-time three-point chart very quickly, and just did what he was supposed to do. It didn't work. They put him in the wrong role, but I think the overall fit is better. When you look at the financials of this, Pelicans saved plenty of money. They are now about $6-7 million under, less saved about $6 million on this deal. But the big part is that for Bay's contract, and I got to give credit to Shamit Dua on this for breaking down the financials, but you take Bay's contract and you can slide that into the trade exemption that you got from the Jonas Valanciunas deal. So you're using that to cover Bay's salary. You still now have 3 trade exemptions available to you as the New Orleans Pelicans. You have the trade exemption that you got from the Brandon Ingram deal. You have a new trade exemption for what you've just traded for Kelly Olynyk and making that trade for him. And then you still have the mid-level available to you as well. Now, you can't combine those, but you have given yourself the ability to add more role players to this team. You're not going to add a star with any of those, but with this exemption for Kelly Olynyk, you get $13 million. And that gives you money to go out and either find a veteran center, to go out and find a point guard, a free agent point guard like a Tyus Jones or someone like that, or to make another trade to pick somebody up off the team. So the Pelicans do gain financially. They also, again, add a second-round pick to this group. So you have the flexibility here with that second-round pick to either take another player that you can stash or that you can put in the G League and start replenishing your young player reserves, or you can package 23 and 40 and maybe try to move up a couple spots more, because you look at what the Brooklyn Nets, who can now have 5 first-round picks. Maybe you can take one of those from the Nets and move up, because I can't see the Nets taking 5 players in the first round of this draft. I just can't see that happening. So you have a potential to move up there. There are other teams with multiple picks in the first round that the Pelicans could target. But you've got to give Joe Dumars and Troy Weaver credit for being aggressive in making these deals. We've talked about the fact that Joe Dumars has always been aggressive when it comes to the first round. We've talked about Troy Weaver always making trades when it comes to the NBA draft. They've done that, and I think what they've done certainly is make the Pelicans a better team today than they were yesterday. Before you've even made a draft pick, you've made this team better today than it is today. I want to shout out to all y'all. We've got 92 in the chat right now. I appreciate you. Make sure you hit that like button for me, and we'll keep this conversation going. And at the end, we'll answer some questions as well. But I'm going to go through my spiel, and talk about everything we want to talk about on the show as we get prepared for that NBA draft. Let's talk about the Pelicans' needs before we get into the players. And I know folks are now figuring where the team leans, and I think you're absolutely right if you're thinking that they are honing in on a center with this, because you've addressed 2 of your needs from your list in one trade. The things that you needed coming into this draft: Pelicans needed 3-point shooting, the Pelicans needed ball handling, the Pelicans needed half-court playmaking, and they needed rim protection. You've addressed 3-point shooting, you've addressed ball handling, and you've addressed half-court playmaking in picking up Saddiq Bey and in picking up Jordan Poole. Both of those guys can knock down shots. Both of those guys can handle the basketball. Poole can be a secondary ball handler. He's not a point guard, obviously, but he can be a secondary ball handler. He can create off the dribble for you. He can make plays in the half court and knock down shots for the Pelicans. So now your big need is rim protection. And that means all signs are pointing towards Kamen Malawach at that number 7 spot. Because you're not going to add a point guard to me at 7 and put Jordan Poole next to a rookie point guard, because now you're trying to make sure that you can facilitate this offense, and you need someone who's going to be able to push the tempo immediately. You have that rim protector is not out there. Even in the free agent center market, I don't think there's a great rim protector. There are plenty of good centers available to you in this free agent market, but I don't see that kind of rim protection that the Pelicans can attract. So this makes Malawach, to me, at 7, feel like the pick. We could all be wrong on this, but I think most people now feel like, and we've seen the mock drafts and we've seen the buzz around this team start to aggregate around Malawach, and I think that he becomes the pick because he's going to give you, at the very least, that rim protection. Even if he's the backup, if you still want to start Yves Missi as you see what Malawach has for you, he can still come in and in his minutes give you draft protection. Give you rim protection. I think you look at him and why he's risen over these last few days, and it's because he's been so good in his workouts. And I think that the concern for him coming in was, could he move laterally? He's shown that he can. He's improved his physique even in the time since he left Duke, and in preparation for this draft, he's got stronger. He's received the full clean bill of health from doctors throughout his time and gotten his medical examinations. So he did go through some minor injury concerns at Duke, but he's been given a clean bill, not a recovering bill of health. He's given a clean bill of health from doctors. So that's an encouraging sign. He's a young player. He's one of the youngest prospects in the draft. He doesn't turn 19 years old until September 14th. So you look at the growth for a guy who's 7'2", 245 at 18 years old. How big and strong, how tall can he become with that athleticism? He's a guy who plays hard on every possession, played with one of the best defenses we've seen in college basketball history. Coaches rave about him, teammates rave about him, and he can anchor that defense with that huge wingspan, and also in the half court give you something that you did not get from Missi enough of last season, that vertical spacing in the pick and roll and as a cutter, and he will run the floor. For a guy that size, he can run the floor. You're not talking about waiting for him as you may for, let's say, a Rudy Gobert, though defensively we're talking about Gobert-type potential. So this is somebody you can have for the long term, whether you are deciding to build around Zion Williamson for the long term or not. You can stick with both of these guys. If you want to keep both Missi and Malawach and have the Eminem boys at center and see how they progress over the next couple of years, and then make a decision if one gets better than the other and you want to move on. But you've got two now that I think you can spend the time on developing, because you don't have to throw the ball into Malawach for him to be effective. And whoever the center is on this team is going to be the 5th option. So if you're looking for somebody, the main things you want out of the center for this team is, can you finish, from that dunker spot? And I think a 7'2", 245 guy better be able to finish from that dunker spot. Can you operate in the pick and roll? Can you finish above the rim? I would say Malawach can do those things. And then if he's giving you 2 block shots and his offensive rebounding is solid, his rebound percentages, again, I emphasize that. Go look and compare players from what they did in college to the NBA. And generally, those numbers are very consistent. And when you look at Malawach's numbers, they were higher than even what Yves Missi's were in college. They were consistent with some of the best rebounders in the NBA who only played 1 season in college over the last decade or so. So I think even if you saw some games where he didn't have the kinds of numbers, you got to remember, he only played 21 minutes a night because Duke was blowing people out so regularly. So even at this, his first real foray into super big-time basketball, he was one of the most impactful players in the country for somebody who hasn't had a ton of experience. And I think you saw that for Yves as well, is that you worried about his experience. But I think there's a lot less deer in the headlights type of aspect to Malawach's game. And yeah, absolutely, Michael. I see Michael Morgan talking about every team in the division has bigs. Yes, absolutely. And most of these teams have multiple bigs. So you've got to be able to have guys who can go through fouls and do these things. I think the worries for folks who are looking for Derek Queen first, Derek Queen's not going in the top 7. And I think the worries about him are issues. He is a little overweight and pudgy. His shooting range is limited. He is very skilled on the block. But I view Derek Queen in similar ways that I looked at a young Jahlil Okafor. And Jahlil Okafor is one of the most skilled post players we've seen since he came into the league. And now he's in the G League trying to find his way back to the NBA. But the problem with Jahlil was that he did not have the kind of three-point game. It didn't develop for him in his career. He wasn't a strong defender, and he wasn't a strong rebounder. And his body needed work. You see him now, and he looks much different than he did when he came into the league. And I think that's the kind of thing that you have to worry about with a Derek Queen is how long it's going to take him to get into NBA-type shape. Is he committed to doing that? How long does he start to expand his three-point game? How long does it take for him to become a defender at the NBA level? Because those are the big concerns about Queen. He does not go in this top 7. I don't see that happening. If the Pelicans trade up and get another pick to go with Queen, if they like, I think you'd have to move Messi to do that if you wanted to have a Malaj Queen double dip. But I think that Queen just the worries there. And you look at the profile that Joe Dumars again has kind of stated for the types of players that he wants. You look at those guys, Sadiq Bey fits that. And he's a guy that they're also kind of familiar with. Where did he play? Played in Detroit for a minute, right? Where did both of these guys just spend their last year? You look at Troy Weaver again, and you say, yeah, Troy Weaver just with the Wizards, right? So there's that connection again and the familiarity. So I think that that's a big part of that. And don't think that Troy Weaver, who spent most of last year in D.C., didn't get his views of Derek Queen, didn't get to see him at the University of Maryland enough. So I think if there was a lot of buzz around Derek Queen for the Pelicans, I think we'd know more about it and we'd know. It just doesn't feel like Queen is their guy. I think that there were perimeter players that they were more interested in. And I think when you look at Malawach in particular, when you're looking at bigs at the top of the draft, he's just a better player today. I'm not saying that Queen is not skilled, but I think a better and impactful player from day one for the team like the Pelicans, Malawach is the choice. Now, I could be wrong. And I said this yesterday. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And I'll just live with that and I'll eat that. But I think today, when you just look at fit, this is the better fit. If there is a wild card pick, if somebody pops up that I'm just not, that we're just not thinking of, I think that guy is Noah Asenge. Because Asenge has been rated as one of the top 5 players as far as talent goes in this draft. Again, a super young player, only 18 years old, has played professional basketball in Germany, has his team is advanced to the finals in that league, and they are playing in the finals right now, and certainly the game 4 would be tonight in their series. I got to check and see if they're actually playing, but game 4 of that series would be tonight if it's still going on. Game 5 would be in the day after the draft, in the day of the second round, excuse me. But Asenge is one of these players that everybody hasn't seen, but they've watched his tape and they've watched him play in these games overseas. You're talking about a kid who's a legitimate 6'10" at 18 years old, 7'1" wingspan, and can play all 3 front court positions. And to have that kind of size and talent, versatility, his youth, the ability to take that shot. And I think with the Pelicans' position now at 7, 23, and 40, one of those picks can be a huge swing for the fences. And if you decide to do that, then I think if you take that swing early, Noah Asenge feels like the type of player that you would take because the interest seems to be rising for that young man. And I think a lot of teams look at him as that kind of that wing archetype of that 6'10" player that, the one that Ace Bailey was talked about, being that long 6'10" and being able to play multiple front court positions. That feels like that momentum has started to shift to Noah Asenge. When you move down to that 23rd pick, that one is still a lot murkier, right? Because I think that if whatever 7 does, and if that becomes Malawach, then you're not taking a big at 23. So that takes guys like Thomas Sorber, takes Danny Wolf, takes Maxime Reynaud off that board. So then what you're looking at 23 is a combination, and it depends on how it falls. But if Olynyk Clifford, who's probably is slated somewhere between 19 and 25, if Olynyk Clifford falls to you, how much value does he have now when you look at this team's wing players? Because now with Poole, with Hawkins, with Antonio Reeves, with Jose Alvarado, with Herb Jones, all of those 5 players playing in your backcourt, not just playing the 3, but all those guys who are going to need time at the 2. It feels like to me, number one, the Pelicans need to seriously think about how they're going to move from Jordan Hawkins. He has to go, and I think that this could be the end for Herb Jones. Because if this team is moving to a team that wants to be more athletic, I get that Herb Jones could fit this and be we know that Herb fits with any team. We know that. But it seems that somebody has to go. And if the Pelicans don't have an immediate deal to move that DeJounte Murray contract, you can't have this many people playing the 2 or the point. And you still need to add, as we've discussed, another point. And you still have Brandon Boston out there under contract with team option. So he may not be back next year if the Pelicans don't pick up his option. But if you do, that's another guy that at times last year played your lead guard spot and shot it pretty well as a 2. So you have a lot of guys who are going to need minutes. You take a Olynyk Clifford at 6'6", he's going to be a lot like a Josh Hart. Yeah, you could probably play him at the 3 a little, but again, Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy are in that 3 rotation already, and you've added Saddiq Bey there. So does Olynyk Clifford, if he falls at 23, is he a value pick at that point? So who do you start looking at? Do you look more at Asa Newell and the season that he had at Georgia? Another young player, only 19, looks like he has all the potential in the world. Is it Liam McNeely? Is it Hugo Gonzalez? Is it Walter Clayton Jr.? All of those guys could be in the mix at 23. Or if the Pelicans move up back into the teens, you start talking about another class of player. But I think that the big domino is whatever falls at 7. However this draft breaks and what the Pelicans take at 7, if somebody jumps up, and I think that with the Nets with all those picks could either be packaging those to move up in the draft to maybe steal Ace Bailey, if he could be the fit for them and be that scoring, provide the scoring that they really need on the wing. If they're jumping up to get him, then that changes what's happening in the middle of the draft and what's going to be available for the Pelicans at 23. If they start to see that shift, do they become more? Does it become more desirable for them to make that draft night move up into the early 20s or into the teens again, or into the mid-teens if you're the Pelicans? And what do you have to give up to do that? And that's why I think that when you look at Herb Jones's contract, again, one of the issues for the Pelicans is they don't have a ton of movable contracts at this point. So unless they're planning on moving Saddiq Bey again, which I don't think that they are, then it feels like if you're talking about the players left on this roster who can be traded, there are only 3 or 4 who could lead a trade. And I don't think the Pelicans are giving up Trey Murphy. It's clear they're not giving up Zion Williamson. Your players that you could give up: Herb Jones, Jordan Hawkins, Antonio Reeves, and Yves Missi. And it seems that Yves is more secure now after this deal, after you've moved Olynyk. So that brings it down to 3. Herb Jones, Antonio Reeves, Jordan Hawkins. I don't think Jose Alvarado, people could throw Jose into the mix, but I don't think Jose Alvarado goes when you don't have a veteran point guard on this roster. They're going to keep some continuity in that backcourt with Jose to be able to run this offense. Though he's not the best option as a starter, at least they feel some confidence in having him run that second unit. So it feels like those players, that group of 3, is all you've really got left to make that move. And of those 3, which one is the most valuable? That's Herb Jones. And it would be an unfortunate situation to give away Herb Jones. But it feels like that we ain't bringing in, and ain't nobody bringing in Enes Kanter. What is it? Enes Freedom, whatever his name is. But and I get it, Alexis. I see your comment. Herb can start at the 2. The only problem is if when Poole is playing is if Poole is the starter at the 2 and the Pelicans go out and get a point guard because they don't have one, then what do you do with Herb Jones? Because if you're playing Poole 30 plus minutes, right? You're playing Poole 34 minutes. If you're playing Trey 30 plus minutes, you're playing Zion 30 plus minutes, you're playing, you know, your center combination is getting that combined 48 minutes up front. You're not really putting Zion at the 5 anymore. So if those minutes are diminished and Zion is splitting time between the 4 and the 3, said that backcourt is kind of crowded. And I would hate to move Herb. I'm not a proponent of moving Herb, but I'm saying if the Pelicans are going, if they see a player that they're really going to get, that's the asset that's most likely to move. I see Jay talking about keep Herb and trade Bruce Brown. The Pelicans would have to, of course, do a sign and trade for Bruce because he's not on the roster currently. So you'd have to do a sign and trade and facilitate that deal for him. And is there an interest now for the Pelicans to do that? And is there an interest for Bruce now to do that? Certainly he would want to get paid, the most he can. But if there's a team that is willing to offer him the kind of money that he wants without the trade, then I think he'll go ahead and do that. Because I don't think there's an incentive if it doesn't work in the Pelicans' favor enough for Joe Dumars to make that kind of deal for Bruce Brown. If he was still under contract, then yeah, I think that you would do that. But if you're doing a sign and trade, yeah, who's going to take Bruce Brown for a 3-year deal? You know what I'm saying? Like, are you invested in Bruce Brown for 3 years guaranteed? I think he feels like a guy the rest of his career who's going to be going on a year-to-year or 2-year deals at the most. It doesn't feel like because his only value has been to winning teams in those wherever else he's been fine, but not impactful. So that doesn't work in the Pelicans' favor. Moving ahead, when you look at those, we've talked about the picks and all the options for the Pelicans, but there have been other moves around the league that I think will impact this team. There have been talks that kind of surfaced today about the Pelicans and the Lakers potentially making a deal that would send Herb Jones to LA for Dalton Connect. I don't know the full extent of that deal. There'd have to be something else moving in that deal because the money doesn't match. But those two, it has been reported, those two players have been the center of a potential deal. Obviously Dalton Connect has been connected to a lot of deals ever since the trade deadline last year. They tried, and his name is still connected with a potential deal with Charlotte. His name is still connected with Brooklyn as well. But if you're talking about Dalton Connect, yeah, there are good things about Dalton Connect. Yeah, he's 6'6", shot at about 38% from 3. His per 36 number, 17 points, 5 boards, about 2 assists. Shot 61% of his field goal attempts from 3-point range and 41% 3-point percentage from corner threes, and is a decent athlete. 45 dunks for him last year. Under contract for just over $4 million next year with the 2 team options after that for a combined total of a little bit more than $10 million. So Dalton Connect has been somebody that the Pelicans, could be rumored to do. But I think if you're moving Herb Jones, it is not to get Dalton Connect unless there are multiple number ones attached to that as well. But I don't see the Lakers don't have that kind of war chest to give the Pelicans those picks. It would have to be a third team involved in that deal. I think you also have to start looking at what the impact of some of these other things has been on the Pelicans, because you look at the KD trade, him going to Houston. Do the Pelicans now have an incentive to either make contact with Phoenix or Houston? And here's my thinking on that. If you're talking to Houston, you're trying to get somebody in that front court, one of those young front court players. You're not going to get Şengün. That's not going to happen because obviously they're excited about the pairing of Şengün, Kevin Durant. They've still got Van Vliet. They've still got Reed Shepherd. They've still got, a lot of their perimeter players as well that they've been, waiting to develop. But in the front court with Kevin Durant playing that 4 spot in Houston, is Jabari Smith Jr. available to come in and be that 4 for the Pelicans. And if I'm the Pelicans, I'm certainly making that call to Houston to see if Jabari Smith is somebody. If would you trade a Herb Jones for a package that included Jabari Smith? I think that's a deal worth considering. Herb Jones for Jabari Smith. Jay, why does it make sense to move your defensive phenom? It doesn't. Let's say, look, I'll be real clear. Herb Jones works with any team. Any team would be glad to have Herb Jones. The Pelicans should not consider moving Herb Jones and take that lightly. But you have to consider it. You have to consider it if you're looking at the long-term future of this team, because Herb is going to be extension eligible this year, right? What does a Herb Jones extension look like? He's making $15 million now, $15 million a year now. In an extension, Herb's worth what, 20 to 25 million, right? So you take that at the high end. Let's bet on the high end. 25 million for Herb, 35 million for Trey. That's 60 million right there. Zion getting 35 plus million, 40 million. That's 100 million. Jordan Poole getting 30 million. That's 130 million right there. That's 130 million in 4 players. And is that a championship team? I don't know if it is. I don't think that it is, because I don't think you would have enough. You can afford the depth that it requires. You just saw the 2 deepest teams in the NBA make the finals. So you've got to be able to afford your depth. And that's the only problem as we get to this part of Herb Jones's career, is can you afford him as the Pelicans if you are not yet a championship contender after these last 2 years of his contract? And it's always better to be too early on moving a player than too late, right? You don't ever want to overvalue your players to the point that you are late in moving on from them. You got to think about this as the Patriot way, right? The New England Patriots maintain their dynasty by making sure that they moved players earlier rather than later. And some of those players were in their prime. I think if you did look at Dallas, I think you're looking more likely for PJ Washington because of his size rather than a Derek Lively who they need. You know, they re-signed their other center and they have Anthony Davis, but you know AD doesn't like to play the 4. And they need, and as also you talk about 3 players who've all been injured before. So if you're looking at PJ Washington, who can play the 3 or the 4, that's the kind of front court flexibility that if you're Pelicans you like. Same with Jabari Smith. He can be a big 3 or a long 4 or even a small ball 5. You know? So the other person I'm looking at is if I'm looking at Phoenix as the other part of that deal with for Durant, Grayson Allen. I'm talking about Grayson Allen. I'm asking about Grayson Allen because the Phoenix Suns have a backcourt that they can't keep all those players, and they're still in the second apron, and they've got a ton of tax payments to make, so they have to offload some talent. I think Grayson Allen would be a good fit in the Pelicans uniform. Tenacious guy, 40%, 3-point shooter, can handle the basketball in both the half court and transition, and is going to defend. And you always want to get more jerks. Pelicans need jerks. Grayson Allen is going to be a very, very, consistent bench contributor as long as he's in this league. Doesn't rely on his athleticism, but is sneaky athletic. If you want to find more shooting, and if the Suns are interested and they can give you the kind of package in return, then I think you just want to make that call. Because you're always on the lookout to take advantage, just like the Pelicans have been in that position at certain times. You always want to take advantage of a team when they've got a surplus of something. When they can't afford something, when they can't afford all the players they've got, or when they are in desperation to start offloading some salary, just like we've seen with the Boston Celtics and the moves that they've made, then you've got to start taking advantage of some of these things. The Celtics found a way to get under the apron in 2 days. You know what I'm saying? In 2 days, the Celtics, who were going to have one of the highest payrolls in the league, have already offloaded Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. Now, the Pelicans could have been in on those talks, I think. For Porzingis, we talked about that and potentially making a deal for him who's going in the final year. and addressing your center position that way. But also, I'm a little more concerned about that deal that didn't get made with Portland. Now, you recovered by trading CJ to Washington, but I was a little concerned originally that the Pelicans could have made that deal with Portland and gotten Anthony Simons and maybe a Robert Williams in exchange for CJ, because I think, well, Mont Dog, I'm going to say this. Why would you want Porzingis? Because you looked at Porzingis as an expiring contract, a guy who could defend the rim. And if you did, he could be your bridge as you were looking for your long-term center. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you don't have to make a long-term commitment for Porzingis. And as an expiring deal, if you had traded, some CJ or Olynyk or whatever that package would have been for Porzingis, I think if you were looking at that as a short-term deal to get better, because CJ wasn't going to be around a long time, Kelly wasn't part of your future, to have Porzingis for a year. My name is Grubb. Y'all got to stop putting the S on it. Look at this GRUBB, no S. All right, don't give me the S. I know it's a habit, people do it. I'm not offended by it, but I'm just letting you know, no S. Two B's, no S. Yes, you need young, healthy players, but when you also need financial flexibility. This team needs financial flexibility. So when I was thinking about the CJ deal, yeah, you need young, healthy players, but if you weren't getting picks for CJ, if you could take back a defensive center in that, Porzingis could have been an option. I didn't say he was the best option. What I'm saying is he could have been an option for you to have a bridge while you were looking for your long-term solution at center. That didn't happen. I'm fine with that, but I'm talking about the impact around the league. I was concerned before, but the overall part of this, yeah, that Anthony Simons thing kind of bothered me before the Pelicans made this move, because I think that knowing that the Trailblazers had Simons ready to move, they know they had him ready to move, and you could have had a Robert Williams, again, not for long term, but you wanted to take that risk on a Robert Williams. I think it could have worked. Let's go to some more of these questions. I like the questions. Please give them to me. Let's go over to Alexis. When have the Pelicans ever had a real shooting big man? I think the best we're going to talk about is Boogie Cousins, right? The best shooting big man the Pelicans have ever had is Boogie Cousins. So it's been rare when they've ever had one, but it's the list starts and ends, in my opinion, I guess, with Boogie. So yeah, I think that you want to find some more that, Jonas could shoot, but that just wasn't his game to have him out there on the perimeter all the time. Certainly, other than that, you have not had that kind of flexibility at the center position. So you got to find that. And that was another thing for Porzingis that I thought about was, yeah, he would play really with Zion. Williamson, he could really have played well with Zion for him. Mirotic, yeah, was a good shooter at the 4 spot. Yeah. But I don't know if we viewed him as a big, right? I think you kind of viewed him as a tall, small, rather than a true big. Wasn't a real double kind of guy. Was mostly an outside shooter, not really the kind of physicality that you got. Ryan Anderson. Yeah, that's a callback. Ryan Anderson. Okay, I'll give you that one, Denzel. Like Ryan Anderson, sure. I don't think you'd want Drew back at this stage, and I don't think Drew wants to come back at this stage. It feels like for Drew to accept that move, and I think Boston obviously was just looking to move his salary. I think for Drew, going back to the West Coast feels like a thing that he would like. And then you talk about the salary. Drew is overpaid at this stage. Like, there was a time in his career where Drew Holiday was an underpaid player. But I think now Drew is an overpaid player. You got that extension for him. And just, I don't think it's the kind of role for him with the that the Pelicans will be able to offer him. You brought in Poole. If you had brought back Drew as well, I think you're looking at two guys. Again, it becomes redundant to have Herb Jones, Drew Holiday, and Jordan Poole. If that were the mix, obviously, I guess if you took Drew, you wouldn't have Jordan Poole. So then your shooting doesn't get better. So I think there's a loss there. I think if you got Drew back, I do wish Boogie had been really good, but him and AD. I'll say this, just going back to that season, thinking about that, because we've mentioned just about everybody in that: AD, Drew, Mirotic, and Boogie. I just remember that season and being around, and I think people really, and you've seen AD do this in his conversations on podcasts, and Boogie do this as well. It's kind of romanticized AD and Boogie's time together, but I can tell you firsthand that it did not go nearly as smoothly as they want to make it seem now. There was a lot of tension in that group between Boogie, AD, and Rondo in particular. Rondo and Boogie had a very, very volatile relationship, a very volatile relationship, and they did not work well together. Rondo was actually kind of happy at the time, not happy that Boogie got injured, but happy that the defense, he really thought that Boogie compromised the defense and was at times a bit selfish. I'll give you this story for free. And this one was told to me by a coach. I'm not going to say their name because I don't know. I'm sure they don't want me to. But I was told that there was a night that Boogie came off the court in the second quarter and was yelling at Alvin Gentry and the rest of the team that he wasn't getting shots. All right. Wasn't getting his shots. Rondo grabs the printed sheet and shows Boogie that he had taken the most shots of anybody on the Pelicans at that point. And if you watch that team this year and you look at the first half particular, Boogie took a lot of shots in the first half. He was going to get into his rhythm. And if you also remember when he went down, that's when AD really jumped up and got himself into the MVP race. At that point, before Boogie got hurt, he was the one being mentioned as an MVP candidate. When Boogie got hurt, I was told that in that situation that Rondo was fine with it. But going back to this incident, Rondo is telling Boogie, you took the most shots, you're selfish, you're begging for shots, all this stuff. They start going, the halftime hits, the buzzer sounds. Rondo goes back to the locker room first. He and Boogie had a little, argument outside. Rondo goes back to the locker room first. Boogie comes in the locker room. Rondo is holding a pipe, and is ready to fight Boogie with this pipe. I don't know where he got a pipe from. The coach couldn't explain where he got a pipe from, but Rondo had a pipe and was ready to fight Boogie in the locker room. And they eventually got it squared away and went back on the court, played the game. But that's how that team was. That it really, obviously, look at the record, it didn't really take off until Boogie went down. You know what I'm saying? So it was an interesting time. Jay, I agree with you. I absolutely would love to have a Rondo, a leader in the backcourt, a really good defensive player. And yes, they did have a love-hate relationship going back to Sacramento. And that's probably when you saw, obviously, that was a really interesting team that year, and they played above their heads at times. But Rondo and Boogie, that relationship was, yes, volatile to say the least. We look at folks excuse me, let me find it. What does CJ bring to what does Poole bring to the table that CJ didn't? I would say that what Poole brings is he's taller. You feel more comfortable with him handling the basketball than you do with CJ, who, could make shots for himself, but CJ being your lead guard was a problem. I think Poole is probably, a better off of movement shooter than CJ was, a guy who could come off screens, catch and shoot, where CJ really wasn't that kind of guy. He operated in the pick and roll, but he wasn't a guy who could run around the court and have a defense in chase mode. I think Jordan can do that. Obviously, a little more athletic than CJ at this page, younger, and you've got him for 2 years rather than having CJ on the expiring. You know what I'm saying? You've got Jordan now for 2 years, so you can find out if you really like him and you want to hold on to him if this is a player. But if he becomes another tradable asset to bring back more picks or more talent in the future. So I think you could absolutely get that with Jordan Poole now rather than what you were getting with CJ. CJ was on borrowed time as soon as last season ended as badly as it did. Benny, we kind of addressed this earlier. But no, Derek Queen is not going to be the 7th pick. I just don't think around the league he's valued that way because of the question marks about him. He still goes lottery, I believe, but I just don't think Derek Queen goes in the top 7 because of the concerns about his fitness, the concerns about his seriousness at times, the concerns about his defensive ability, and his lack of real outside shooting. He didn't take a lot of jumpers outside of 15 feet last season for Maryland. And I would also say, again, going back to Troy Weaver, he got to see Derek Queen a lot last year, certainly keeping an eye on the Big Ten while he was with the Wizards and having Maryland not too far from his backyard. Um, who should the Pelicans take at 23 and 40? We talked a lot about 23. Again, if you're looking at guys like Meek Clifford, Asa Newell, um, Maxime Reynaud, Liam McNeely, Hugo Gonzalez, and Walter Clayton. I think those are the names that you see most often attached to the Pelicans. Some of those guys are upside guys. Some of those guys are more veteran players, like when you talk about a Clayton or you talk about a Nick Clifford. Those are guys who fulfilled their college eligibility, but got better each and every year and come in and be contributors for you immediately. But I think now, after the Jordan Poole trade, I think the Pelicans are more than likely to take a swing for the fences with that 23rd pick. So I think that you take a more high upside player in that position. But it's going to be interesting to see how that board falls. Because you look at a team, the Nets are now the biggest player in this draft with 5 first-round picks. And then you also look at Oklahoma City that has multiple first-round picks, which I doubt that they want to use 2 first-round picks this year because of all the players that they have to re-sign and start thinking about extensions for. So there's a lot of movement that's going to happen in this draft still. I think there are going to be a lot of trades between now and the start of the draft. And then during the draft, there are going to be even more trades going on. So we could see some major movement, and the Pelicans may package 23 and 40 to move up. There may be players involved in trades to move up. There may be more second-round picks coming in for the Pelicans if they move some of these back-end guys. Let's say if you move Jordan Hawkins for a second-round pick. Okay, if you move Antonio Reeves for another second-round pick just because you feel like with the Jordan Poole, he's going to get less minutes now. And you still have to remember that DeJounte Murray is on this roster holding $30+ million in salary. So if you're not moving DeJounte, you still have to be responsible economically. I love this one. Bring back Luke Babbitt. I love that, Reed. No, Luke Babbitt ain't coming back. Moving up, going after young fish. Yeah, I think either they're going to move up with 23 and 40. I don't think they're moving up with 7, but 23 and 40. I think that they're looking to move up with. But I absolutely think if they do move up, they're doing it to take a swing, to go for a higher upside player. Because, I think that's what you should do in this draft. I think you need to, if you're the Pelicans, you need to make sure one of these is a bird in the hand. You know what I'm saying? Somebody that you can get a contribution from day one. But I think you take that second player with the idea. And certainly as you look at Willie Green and his future, because Joe Dumars is making it very clear that nobody's past really matters with the Pelicans right now. These moves are making it clear that he's not being beholden to these players. And I don't think he's beholden to Willie Green either. I think he was, again, told to hold on to Willie Green for this year by ownership, but I don't think he's to start the year. But I think if it goes badly, Willie's gone. And we've talked about this before, and coach-proofing your picks. If you take an upside pick with that second pick, if you're taking an upside pick, that player will be at his best when Willie is gone. You know what I'm saying? So you take that first pick that's Willie-proof, that can play on day one. You take that second pick as a longer-term investment who cannot be ruined this year, but can have the kind of talent and potential that when you get your next coach, that can start to flourish. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the thing. Is the plan to play Poole as a point guard until Murray returns? I think we'll find that out soon enough, because there are guys like Tyus Jones who I think could be a good stopgap point guard until you figure out what to do with DeJounte. A guy who I think is obviously top 5 all time in assist to turnover ratio, has led the league in assist to turnover ratio the last 3 years, I believe. So I think that the Pelicans are not beholden to putting Poole as the point guard. And I think they don't want to put that kind of pressure on him, to run this offense. I think it feels like Zion is still your primary ball handler at this stage. And for Poole, and I think Trey Murphy showed last year that he can handle the ball and create some assists. We saw double-digit assists games from Trey. You have multiple players now who can handle the basketball. The biggest thing for me is no matter who has the basketball, They got to run. Like everybody you get, you got to find people to push the tempo. This team is only going to be at its best when it is constantly running. This got to be like Coach Carter. You know what I'm saying? Like Pelicans, to me, that's the model as far as you talking about type style of play. Defensively, you just beat up at everybody's chest. You got guys who want to attack defensively. If you get beat, that's why you start thinking about again that backline center. If you have a guy who, if you get beat, can protect you by blocking shots and defend that way. And I guess it also it reinforces those who say don't move Herb Jones, but you have to be able to defend on that perimeter, create some turnovers, and then get out and utilize those guys at what they do best. You saw Jordan Poole in Golden State, a guy who was the third best player on a championship team in the finals, behind Steph. Wiggins had a great finals. Poole was probably the third best player that year. So you have a guy who's been the third best player on a championship team, who can excel in the half court in that Warriors kind of passing system, but also can excel in the open floor, shot it really well on a bad Wizards team. You know what I'm saying? So I think that Poole is a guy, you look at the thing with Draymond, but again, it's a lot like the Boogie situation, ain't it? Everybody has a problem with Draymond. So I think you look at Poole, and I think, you get more from Poole than what you really thought. Kind of almost have to go after somebody like Ace Bailey or Ford in the draft. It feels like now with these picks, Brooklyn's moving up to get Ace Bailey. Like I would think that Brooklyn is really targeting Ace Bailey at this stage, because certainly Utah doesn't want to utilize Ace Bailey. I could see Utah being a partner with Brooklyn to move back if let's say Trey Johnson is not available by the time Utah drafts, or the Wizards could move back if they don't take Bailey. I think the Wizards would be the lowest before the Pelicans that Bailey would fall, or I think the Nets would jump up and take that pick if they offered somebody, let's say 2 first-rounders to move up to take Ace Bailey. I think if you're the Jazz, it might be in your best interest to move back a little bit and take multiple picks. If you're the Hornets, it might be in your interest to move back and take multiple first-round picks. So I think Brooklyn, because of that treasure trove that they now have, I think you think about the lineup, Ace Bailey fits in and can play for them for day one. And Ace Bailey with the Pelicans, as we talked about, you got to deal with Trey Murphy, you got to deal with Zion Williamson, you got to deal with this. And I think, again, if you're handling Ace Bailey, you really have to have the right environment for him. And there's still going to be a lot of things going around the Pelicans, like deciding if this is going to be Zion's team for the long term, deciding Willie Green's future, deciding Trey Murphy's long-term, future, deciding Jordan Poole's future now. I don't think you want to put an Ace Bailey with the mix of things. Again, not to denigrate Ace, but the situation has to fit the player. And I don't know if the Pelicans situation is the best for Ace Bailey. I think there are teams that can give him the things that he wants on draft night. Danny Wolf, I like Danny Wolf. The only concern with Danny Wolf is that he can't shoot free throws. He shot 59% at the free throw line. But if you take a center at 7, you're not taking Danny Wolf at 23. Like I don't think that that's the case. I don't think you're taking to have 3 young bigs who need minutes along with, the ones you're bringing back, like, Carlo Makovic. Now you've got 4 bigs, what I'm saying, in their first or second year. That's not going to work for the Pelicans. You know what I'm saying? I just don't think if you take the center at 7, you're not taking another one at 23. The guy at 40, and I've kept saying this, is Sion James. You're not going to get me to move off of that. If the Pelicans can have a chance to take Sion James at 40, I say take Sion James. And I broke down Sion's game a little while back, but I'd say this. If you take Sion James, it becomes a lot more palatable to trade Herb Jones. Sion James is a Herb Jones type of player, but stronger and more physically dominant than Herb, but can do a lot of the same things. And is a guy who improved his jump shot every year of his career. Went from a guy who hated to shoot to a guy who shot the ball very well by the time he got to that 5th year at Duke. Great defender, solid passer, doesn't turn the basketball over, can defend all the perimeter positions. And if you do get him into a switch in the post, Sion James is the kind of when you saw an Alex Caruso guarding centers, Sion James is way more physically talented than an Alex Caruso, a guy who, physically can hold down multiple positions and even be at 6'5", 6'6" for Sion, be a small ball four for you. Like, that's how good Sion James is, in my opinion. If they don't get him, okay. But if he's available at 40, I think Sion James is a really good player to take in that. I do not undervalue Herb. If you have seen this, we've talked about this. Anybody who thinks I undervalue, I've been a Herb Jones defender. I've been a Herb Jones defender on this. I've had arguments, and not personal arguments, but I've had arguments with Chaz about Chaz undervaluing Herb Jones. Because I think Herb, I've said it. I think Herb Jones is a player that fits on any team, and his value to the Pelicans, he has been, over his 4-year career, either the most valuable or the second most valuable player statistically each year of his career. I think Herb Jones, and I wrote an article on this on the Bird Rights. I think Herb Jones has a similar career path to Derek White as far as the kind of production that they can have throughout their career. Derek White was a 4-year player in college. Derek White came into the league with the first 4 years of their career, and you look at their shooting numbers, Herb is actually a better shooter than Derek White was over the first 4 years. They're both great defenders, obviously. I feel like Herb Jones, if you have the time and you have the roster, Herb Jones could be a guy who gives you 15, 5 and 5 every night. Like, Herb's never going to be a 10-rebound guy, and he's not going to get the shots on a team to be a 19, 20-point scorer. But I absolutely believe Herb Jones, in the right circumstance, could be a 15, 5 and 5 guy. You know what I'm saying? I don't undervalue Herb Jones at all. I think there's a reason that everybody wants Herb Jones, and it's because he's extremely, extremely valuable. So nobody would ever tell me that I undervalue Herb. I was one of the people when Herb Jones, in the summer league of his rookie year, as soon as Zion Williamson down, you can go look this up too. Herb Jones, when Zion went down Herb's rookie year, I said Herb Jones needs to be the starter. So nobody ain't gonna tell me, David Grubb, that I undervalue Herb Jones. I love Herb Jones, but I'm just talking about the business of basketball, and that's my job, right? I can't be partial here. I just got to be honest. And I think if the Pelicans, again, if you're talking about how many tradable contracts do the Pelicans have? It's not many, because of the cost of these individual players, or the kind of players that you have underneath those. The ones who are affordable aren't the kind of players that other teams want. Like, ain't nobody knocking on your door for Jordan Hawkins. They'll take him, but ain't nobody calling for him. You know what I'm saying? Antonio Reeves they're not calling for Antonio Reeves. They're not calling for Carlo Makovich. They're not calling for Yves Missi. People will take them. I think they like some of those guys, but they're not, nobody's looking at them as, today is the kind of player I have to have. I think they're all fine players, except for Jordan. I think Jordan's bust. But I think all those guys are fine players, but I just don't think the Pelicans have enough tradable assets still. And I think that's what Joe Dumars and Troy Weaver are trying to do, is give the Pelicans more flexibility in both financially, which they did with this trade, and personnel-wise, which they did with these 2 trades. They have given themselves more financial and roster flexibility, and that's what you have to have when you are a mediocre team, right? When you are a mediocre team, you better have some flexibility. And the Pelicans are getting their flexibility back. Noah Sange, I am a real fan of Noah Sange. I think he could, certainly there are draft boards that have him as the 3rd or 4th most talented player in this draft. So, yeah, I absolutely think Noah Sange is a really, really interesting player. 6'10", 7-foot plus wingspan, can do everything on the court, could play the 3, the 4, or the 5 for you, has already played professional basketball, is currently playing professional basketball. So, yeah, he fits that archetype of that long, talented 6'10" wing player. Yeah, absolutely. Trade Missi before Herb. I get it. I understand what you're saying. I get it. The Pelicans should not be in a rush to trade Herb. No. But if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. You cannot let your personal feelings ultimately impact the future of this team. You're not winning a championship this year. I think all of us would agree that, right? The Pelicans are not winning the championship this season, right? If that's the case, and we're talking about at least 2 years away from a championship, again, Herb will be 28 at that point and will be getting paid will be demanding a contract somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 million. Financially, you have to see if that's worth it. Today, I'm fine with it. I'm absolutely fine with it. I think the Pelicans could wait a year to make their decision on Herb. But if they are really trying to continue to restructure this offer with veterans, the roster with veterans, then Herb is the option to move. I do not like the Herb for Connect rumor. If that's the rumor that's going around, I don't like it. I would not take Dalton Connect for Herb Jones. I don't think Dalton Connect's almost as old as Herb. You know what I'm saying? He just finished his rookie year and he's 24. He's only 2 years younger than Herb Jones. So I don't think Dalton Connect makes sense at all. And I haven't really heard Herb's name connected to other players. But Dallas, again, like you had that conversation last year about Dallas, that rumor that Dallas was interested. They probably are still interested. But if you had to give up Herb Jones to get PJ Washington, I don't know if that's the deal that I would make, but that's the price you probably have to pay. So if you want to find another front court player, if you're trying to find a veteran big who can come in and contribute, the only player you've really got to give up is Herb Jones. Even if you were trying to offload DeJounte, what's your easiest way to offload DeJounte? Especially now that those Milwaukee picks may not be as valuable. Because when I look at Milwaukee, and I'll get back to the questions in just a second, but I just want to say this. When you look at Milwaukee and the fact that the Bucks can now look at the East and say the Celtics are now reloading and changing their roster. They've already moved 2 pieces of their championship core. They will not have Jason Tatum next year. It looks like they're also looking at trading Jaylen Brown. So if you're the Bucks, you're looking at that. The Pacers are compromised without Tyrese Halliburton. The Knicks could be a mess depending on if they find a coach and what goes on with the pairing of Karl Towns and Jalen Brunson. So if you're the Bucks, if you can convince Giannis to come back now, originally the thought was that the Bucks may be committed to having a gap year and saying, hey, Giannis, hang around for 1 more year and we'll figure it out in year 2. But now, if you're the Bucks, it may be in your interest again to try to go and reload and try to make a run this year because the Sixers are not going to be great again. The Hawks aren't going to be great. The 2 teams you're looking at the top of the East are Cleveland and Orlando right now. And then the Knicks are the 3rd team in that mix. Cleveland, Orlando, and New York. And if you're the Bucks, you have to figure you can compete with those teams if you make a couple of deals. If you can retain Brook Lopez, if you can retain, Bobby Portis Jr., the Bucks could make themselves a team that could try to make a run to the Eastern Conference Finals. Because again, we've seen now that seeding doesn't seem to matter in the NBA. It's about matchups more than seeding. And so if you're Milwaukee and they can be good now, again, for a couple more years, if you're the Pelicans, are those picks as valuable as they used to be? And if you can use those to move off of DeJounte, sure. But if it takes, let's say, to move off of DeJounte's contract, it costs you Herb Jones, again, I think that's a deal you'd have to consider. Not saying it's the right deal, but I want to know what the return is. But if you're shopping somebody, that's your best asset today. I don't think Herb Jones is a low value player. I think he's a high value player. Absolutely agree. 3 through 8, essentially the same value. I would not trade up higher than 7. It doesn't make sense to me to trade up higher than 7. There might be players in this draft that you like a little bit more. Certainly, you may. I think I'd take Trey Johnson if I'm just going on talent. Trey Johnson, I think, is a extremely high upside player. But, I think that Trey Johnson is going to be gone by the time they get to 7. But I think the value at 7 is there. The question is at 23, and what are they going to do with that? And the question is at 40. I agree with you, Alexis. I don't know what to expect either, but I like that the front office is being proactive and aggressive and doing it early, like getting ahead of this game and really figuring out what they want to do. I hope that there's a plan and you're not just stockpiling assets and making moves to make moves, but they are trying to make this team better. And I think it is better today than it was yesterday. Let's see more. We're gonna do about 3 or 4 more questions. All right. You think we get Scotty Barnes with the? No, I don't think so. I think Scotty Barnes. They developed Scotty. He's their homegrown player, and I think they view Scotty as the fulcrum of their offense. He's the guy to make it run. Because if you're talking, you're not going to put the ball in RJ Barrett's hands. Brandon is going to slow down your offense, right? We already know that. So he's going to be your primary scorer, clearly. RJ Barrett, your secondary scorer. So I think that your ball handler and your passer is Scotty Barnes. He's also your best defender on that team. So I think that's why Scotty Barnes isn't going to go anywhere from Toronto. And I think Toronto still feels like they've got to move to get better as well. They've already said that they're not trading Jacob Poeltl as well. So I think Toronto is trying to get really good, really fast again, because everybody views the Eastern Conference as extremely fluid. 2 more and we'll call it a night. Let's see. After the interview, Murray got to be gone. I think, again, DeJounte Murray, we've seen this in multiple places for him. When he's ready to go, he kind of makes it known through his statements that he doesn't really enjoy where he is. And I don't see how you can put him back in that locker room after he essentially said his team had no guidance and that they were just out there hooping. As long as how do you bring him back into that locker room, even in training camp? How do you have him come and sit with this team at any time when, if you're Willie Green, what do you do with the guy who publicly called you out? You already had to deal with that with Brandon Ingram, but we saw how that went. So you're going to bring back an injured, DeJounte Murray was something to prove to this team, to prove to himself. And, an out-of-place person, whatever happens in January, he will not have a seat, a comfortable seat with this team. So it feels like, he just got to go. All right, let's see. See who's the last one I'm going to go with. Let's see. Maximum amount of rookies you want to take on. We'll end on this one. I think you can have 3 rookies in camp, because the thing is, again, you're knocking off the Elfrid Payton contract, right? They're not going to bring Elfrid back. I think that's clear now. I think that Brandon Boston could come back, but you're taking that 3rd pick with the intent to give him a 2-way. You got Lester Quinones on the 2-way, but I believe he's your only 2-way deal right now. So you can sign another 2-way, and that's with that 2nd-round pick, and you're hoping that becomes your next Najee Marshall, your next Jose Alvarado, right? In your 2nd round, you're hoping that that's the kind of player you pick up there, so you're not worried about the roster. But if you take 2, again, I believe the first 2, those first rounders, however it shakes out, you're taking 1 to contribute immediately, and you're taking 1 with upside that by year 3, they're really starting to come together. You know what I mean? Like, you're taking that prospect that by the time they mature at 21 years old rather than at 19, that they're ready to be a starter for you. But you've got to have a plan. You have to have a plan for that second player. And you kind of, in my opinion, need to keep them away from the current coaching staff. Like, that player should always kind of be focused on development. You know what I mean? Like, that high value player, you want them to be developed in it. The current coaching staff, the current player development system, none of us have trust in it, do we? Who has trust in the current system, right? I would just mention this too. I guess the last one is, the point Zion competition, or the point Zion, and the criticism of it. I think the point Zion thing, if you use it, it's just like anything else. If you're using it, that's cool. You know what I'm saying? That's cool. But to make it the offense, which I think is where the Pelicans have made the mistake, to make it the offense has been the problem. Because Zion is as much as he's going to pass it, and he has that mindset, it's like having, again, I compare Zion a lot to Allen Iverson, right? Like, if you're playing with Allen Iverson, you got to understand what Allen Iverson's going to do. And it's going to be the same thing every night. It's going to be relentless. I'm coming at you this way. I'm going to score this way, and my teammates are going to react to it. And I need teammates who are ready to react to it. But you didn't put the ball in Iverson's hand to run the thing, right? You put Iverson in a position to do what he does, and at certain times it's just him to cook. And that's the thing with Zion too. If he's going, let him do it. Let him have the ball. If he's going, let him do what he's doing. But you have to have that person on the floor to get everybody else in position. You have to have the person who's on the floor who knows what everybody else is supposed to do, is telling them to do it, recognizes when people need shots, who can recognize that it's been 5 minutes since Trey Murphy took a shot, who can recognize that what the defense is doing and where the weaknesses are and do something about it. And that means you got to have a leader in the backcourt. And that to me is the biggest failure. And the thing that DeJounte Murray didn't talk about enough is what were his failures on the court. And the biggest failure for DeJounte Murray on the court, take away the poor shooting, take away the turnovers, take away the injuries. The biggest failure for DeJounte Murray on the court is that he never led that team. He never led that team. Did you see DeJounte on the court calling plays out and putting people in position? Did you see him talking about after games that, yeah, we got to do more to get this guy shots? Yeah, we got to get Trey going. Yeah, I need to see this. You saw him complain at times after games and say we got out-coached or we got outplayed or we need better effort. But I never saw the kind of impact on the court that this is my team. Because he said when he came in, the Pelicans giving me the ball, they're going to let me be the point guard again. I couldn't do that in Atlanta. They put the ball in his hands. He was not the leader of the team. You need a legitimate leader on this team. You need somebody to run the squad. And I think that's what the Pelicans have lacked. They're not going to find it in this draft today. You know what I'm saying? They're not going to find the player in the backcourt who's going to lead them today. Maybe they can find the leader tomorrow, but they've got to go outside of this. They're going to go outside of this to find that point guard, because that point guard is not in this draft. That leader is not in this draft. But you got to go out and check out some other teams and see what you can do to find, at the very least, a bridge point guard who can take control of this team. All right, y'all. I really appreciate y'all sticking with me throughout this hour and 12 minutes. I appreciate it carrying this, doing this myself. I appreciate also the shout out on the t-shirt, Donato. Today is, if you don't know, today is the Soul Glow t-shirt coming to America. Make it oh so silky smooth. Just let it shine through. Just let your soul glow. Yes, Tyus Jones. I would like to see Tyus Jones play for the Pelicans, at least for the short term. All right, y'all. We'll be back tomorrow, 6:50. I think we're going to pick up for the draft live show with all the crew right here live. So make sure you come back. In the meantime, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the share button, and leave your comments for me below. What we'll do, leave your comments here, even after the draft. I'll be back on Thursday, obviously, with the post up. So come back on Thursday. Leave your post-draft reactions, not just on the show for tomorrow, but under my show. So I make sure I review those, and I'll answer your post-draft questions on Thursday as well. So until the next time, I appreciate you. I thank you. This has been the Post Up with David Grubb on Boo Crew Media. See you tomorrow.